Hello and welcome to another episode of Five Alarm Task Force. And I'm your host, Steve Green. It's a pleasure to have you with us again. If you're a regular listener or viewer now that we're on YouTube, we're happy to have you. If you're a new viewer or a new listener, we're very pleased and welcome you with open arms and hope you like what you hear. If you like it so much you want to hear more of our episodes, you can just go to our website at www.dalmatianproductions.tv. Just click on the podcast tab at the top of the page, and that will take you to our library where we have over 160 wonderful podcasts you can binge on while you're still remaining in your home, keeping this country and our communities safe by staying safe, staying well, and staying home. If you go to our website to listen to those podcasts, you can also sign up for our newsletter right on that homepage. They'll be there. And we've also put some important information on the homepage today. And by the way, today I have a returning guest, and I couldn't have really connected with a better guest for what we're going through today. His name is Anthony Mangeri, and he's going to be with us in just a second. And when you hear his resume, you're going to know why I wanted him to be my guest on today's podcast. We also want to remind you that you can follow us on Facebook under our names, either /DalMatProd or /Five Alarm Task Force. And if you like us, please let us know, and let us know that you're following us so that we can say hello to you back. And we have several hundred of you there, and we're really happy to do it and have you there. We're trying to get back there as quickly as we can, but when you're the only two hands managing all the social media, it's kind of tough to be in every place at the same time. Also, if you're listening to this as a podcast on one of your favorite platforms, please remember that it is very important for you to leave a positive review for us on that platform. Why? Well, because when other people search for Five Alarm Task Force, the better the reviews, the better the algorithm places us higher in the search cone. So it's very important that you do that for us. And if you enjoy the podcast and enjoy the show and you're a regular listener and want to kind of spread the joy, you know that we have a little store with our friends at Teespring. You go to bit.ly/Dalmat with a capital D and store, capital S. And we have several T-shirts there and some mugs that you can purchase for family and friends. And then you'll know that the goodness out of your hearts by doing that is that all the proceeds from the net proceeds from those sales go to the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. And before we start, I want to also remind you that on Friday, the 17th of April, that's a week, we're recording this on Thursday the 9th, and that's going to be a week from tomorrow. Friday the 17th at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, together with Insight Training, Dalmatian Productions, and Five Alarm Task Force is bringing you a special webinar that is generously sponsored by our good friends over at LifeScan Wellness Centers. It's coronavirus webinar for first responders. There's a $10 registration fee and limited to the first 100 registrants, and all the net proceeds of the webinar are going to be split between the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation and the First Responders Center for Excellence. Our guest for that webinar will be former Chief Todd LeDuc. He was the Executive Assistant Chief for Broward County Fire Rescue. He is now the Chief Strategy Officer for LifeScan Wellness Centers. And Chief Dan Kerrigan, he's the Fire Chief at Upper Providence Township in Pennsylvania. And of course, the co-author of Firefighter Functional Fitness. And both Todd and Dan are members of the IAFC Safety, Health, and Survival Committee. And our third guest, and we're very lucky to have Dr. Denise Smith, professor at Skidmore College, and she's the director of the First Responder Health and Safety Laboratory. If you are interested, you can go to our website for more information, and right on our homepage is the link to take you to buy your tickets and give you the information. So instead of me giving it to you with a whole URL here on the podcast, go to our website. Right on the homepage at the top, you'll have a link there that says click here, and it'll take you there. And that's all our business. And now we can get on to the pleasure of this podcast and this video cast with my guest. We became friends, I guess through contact. I think we contacted on LinkedIn was the first time. And Anthony reached out, and he had a great podcast on education for those in emergency services, first responders today. whether it's an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree or BS degree, whatever. He had great information. And I'll actually try to look and find that podcast number for you so you can go back and listen to it. But let me tell you a little bit about him. He is certified as an MPA, CPM, and CEM, and he is a consultant and faculty teaching fire and emergency management and homeland security courses. Anthony has more than 30 years of experience in fire and emergency management, including many years in public health emergency preparedness. He earned the rank of Assistant Chief Safety Officer, serving as the Fire Department's Health and Safety Officer for 3 years. Anthony served as the New Jersey State Hazard Mitigation Officer. During the terrorist attacks of 9/11, he served as Operations Chief at the New Jersey Emergency Operations Center, assisting with the coordination of the state's response. He has been a volunteer firefighter and emergency medical technician for more than 30 years. He earned a Master of Public Administration from Rutgers University. He is a certified public manager and has received the designation of Certified Emergency Manager. In addition, he has completed a fellowship in Public Health Leadership Initiative for Emergency Response, sponsored by the Center for Public Health Preparedness. He is currently a regional president for the International Association of Emergency Managers and is also a chair of the ACES Fire and Life Safety Council. And I just found out he's recently become a town manager somewhere in the state of Delaware. Anthony, welcome back. I'm thrilled to have you back with us.
Hey, good to see you today. How are you?
Good, good. We're doing well. And folks, as I said, when you listen to Anthony's resume, you know that this is a person who knows what he's talking about, especially in what we're dealing with today. And we decided that the best way of talking with him today is Anthony and I, we talked via email, and we decided that we'd come up with several different areas that I guess are out there in the public's eye. A lot of it is general public, but we want to really aim this at our first responders, our brothers and our sisters. I mean, we're there. We've been there. We are there. We've all handled emergencies. None of us has ever faced an emergency like we're dealing with now. And to our brothers and sisters who are still out there on the front lines, kudos. Okay, so Anthony, let's start with our first question. What do you think, in your opinion, with your knowledge, generated the fast spread of the virus outside of China? And we're going to deal with facts, not fables, on this show.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me here today. I do want to point out the resume sounds really good, but it's only longevity. I've been in the wrong place at the right time and said yes too many times, and that's all that amounts to.
Yeah, been there, done that. Okay.
The fact of the matter is that I think many of us in public safety don't say no. It's the nature of who we are. I also think that this is one of those events where we have to be very, very careful at tracking what it is that the risk and the reward for what we do. You know, we often in emergency management and in public safety training talk about do we do a response or does a recovery, and you know, that risk versus reward in many emergency operations. And this is no different. We need to very much understand what is going on and do the assessment of risk so that we could determine the effective PPE to have and the effective response. The same rules apply that always apply. COVID is not different than any other emerging highly infectious disease. The question is, do we have the equipment and resources for the scope and the magnitude of this disease? And we'll talk a little bit about that. So first of all, to answer your question about fables, it's not a complicated process. It's a simple math problem. What occurred was this disease emerged in most likely, everyone believes, China. When the disease emerged, there were a couple factors that occurred. Number one is it emerged in an area where people congregated and then migrated. It's very simple. As people left that area and moved to other areas, Europe, went on vacation, whatever holiday, whatever the issue was, travel of this disease moved to the major cities. And once it started to move to the major cities, obviously by things like airplane and boat and people travel. They travel to airports and hubs Once it moved to those areas, it started to migrate into those cities. And from those cities, it started to move across borders. And that's why we're seeing Italy and areas of Europe be so impacted. It's why we're seeing Germany, China, Hong Kong, those areas. It's spread. And into the west coast of the United States as well, where it migrated into the major cities in the United States. San Francisco, LA, Washington, New York, Philadelphia, those areas. And then it migrated to the areas surrounding there and spread. Then we had spring break. And before spring break, obviously, we had everybody, many people, I should say, not everybody. Many people do some kind of traveling as we start to emerge out of winter and in the spring, visiting family. You know, people come out of their house. I mean, it wasn't a horrible winter, but it was time to get out. And spring break didn't help. People migrating didn't help. But it added to the problem because people then congregated in large groups. And this disease is a bit of a problem in that a good number of people that are infected with this virus, they don't know. They don't have significant enough symptoms to feel very sick. So what happens is that they're still meeting with people, going out and about. The warnings in early or late February, the warnings to the public were not as urgent as they are today, or as, I don't know if urgent's the right word, but you know what I mean.
Right.
So what happens is people migrated, they congregated, they went to work, they did their normal routine of life. And we are creatures of habit. So telling an individual to break their routine is very, very difficult. So these individuals moved, they migrated, they went to parties, they did different activities that they thought were normal and customary, and the disease continued to spread unchecked. Now we know more about the disease because, first of all, there's testing methodologies that are starting to assess and identify what are the people, who are the people that are infected, so that we can isolate and quarantine those individuals depending on their status. And we could start to define this hazard. The thing that has confused me from the beginning was this sensitivity about testing. First of all, obviously, initially, the resources were not there to test. This is a novel virus. So that everybody understands what that means, this is new. Novel means new, not yet seen in humans. So the problem is that we have to build everything to address this threat. And when we say build, it's not like, okay, I just go get a lab test and, you know, look or that. We have to know what to look for, what antibodies, what is it that we're looking for that identifies an individual as being contaminated. We have to build the test. The test then has to be distributed. It has to be checked for efficacy, for its ability to be valid. And you can't put a test out there that's 30% valid, to give you an example. I'm just generic. So we have to make sure the test was valid. So that took time. Science is catching up with the demand, and science is doing what they need to do, but it takes time. Unfortunately, as we know, in emergency response time, many times in a crisis, is an enemy, because the longer you have to wait, the more people are in harm's way. So that's kind of what triggered this. The testing systems are out there now. The orders to stay at home, I'll explain why that's so important. And I realize as an emergency responder, you can't stay at home, but there are things that you can do in your station as far as social distancing, as far as working together as a crew, but at the same time, mitigating so that responders don't spread the disease amongst themselves, which is a big concern.
Sure.
Especially because if you've ever worked in a firehouse, you eat together, you live together, you work together, you're a family. Well, you have to keep some distancing, because while you're a family, you may actually work or volunteer in multiple stations. You may work or volunteer or be in other places in day-to-day jobs and then coming back. So you're exposing yourself to other people than just your family. So this is a concern. This is how the disease spreads so rapidly and what is going on at this time. Sorry about that. I'm working from home, so a little bit of background noise we're trying to mitigate. So spring break, holiday migrations, the orders to shelter in place are the resolve to that for a couple reasons. And there's a couple of things to go over. so that we understand. There are a couple of things that we look at in public health, and this disease is similar to other coronaviruses that have come down the pike. One of those coronaviruses, for example, was SARS in 2002. Smaller by scope, absolutely, but still it gives us some insight into behavior or what might happen. The second one was called MERS, which was Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. That was in 2012. Again, very similar, a coronavirus. They're similar in a variety of ways, but they're also very different. This is a novel virus, or COVID, because it is different and it reacts and behaves a little bit different. Its mechanisms might be the same and how it harms you are similar, but it's things like the rate at which it moves through people and through the population is different. So to give you an idea, the case fatality rate, which is still being developed for COVID-2, by the way, or COVID-19, because it is still emerging as a concern. So we're trying to figure out what these issues are. But for SARS was 10%, for MERS was 34% fatality rate. For this, so far, it's been in the area of 5 to 6%. And at different places, different things. And to give you the difference, New York is 4.9, somewhere in there, I'm ballparking it. And please, I should clarify and say from the beginning, I'm not a doctor. I'm an emergency responder and public safety person like the rest of you. The only difference is I worked in public health preparedness. So everything I'm talking about is from a public health perspective to explain the impact and risk to the public and as a larger public health concern.
Sure.
I'm certainly not a doctor in any stretch of the imagination. But Delaware, a smaller state, working to isolate itself a little bit better, is at 1.7 rate. So they're doing something good, and everybody's doing something good because we're down below that the international average.
Right.
So the things that we look at is reproductive ratio. How quick does it spread? And one of the things that we noticed is that SARS, and this was as of March, the end of March, SARS basically, if you have, COVID, if you have COVID, then the current coronavirus, the novel virus, if you have that virus, you might spread it to 2 or 3 people, somewhere along those lines. And those numbers are all still being worked out. This is still emerging threat. We're still at the beginning stages of this. Whereas flu would be 1-to-1. If I had flu, I probably would infect 1 person. With COVID-19, I'm probably going to infect 2 to 3 people. So that you could see just that by its own right shows how quick this can move, or at least
sure.
The second part of this that we look at is something focusing on the, I'm trying to think of the right word to use, but really what we're looking at is really the interval rate. So how quick does the symptoms from the first patient start to show on the first and second patient? So the interval rate for this is actually less than influenza, for example. So time to what the interval rate is time to symptoms, and that is actually slower in this event, ironically. So the value of it is that with COVID-19, that rate is somewhere around 5 to 7.5 days, give or take, versus the few days that it might be for a flu. So this is really important to understand, because if this disease had that rate of spread that flu has, we'd be in a lot more trouble. But because the spread rate is somewhat less and still bad, please don't misunderstand, that is why we're not seeing this wildfire, but we are seeing this thing spread rather quickly, because 3 people, 3 to 1, it's just amazing how many people could be infected. The
Right.
reason the spread rate becomes so important, and the reason all of these issues become important, because it helps us to understand the dynamics. You know, the first rule of any crisis, we arrive on scene as fire and emergency service people. We're either doing a size up or an initial assessment. And the purpose of that really is to identify the threat, to determine what resources you need and where to get those resources, and your plan of action, right? Your incident action plan. It's the same thing here. We need to define the threat better so that we can understand, and science is getting there, so that we can understand an effective response.
Right.
And that's right where we're at right now, is developing that effective response based on the statistics or the threat profile. And if you're an emergency manager, you call it a threat profile. You know,
Sure.
we know a hurricane behaves a certain way, a flood behaves a certain way. We're trying to figure out how this behaves so that we can build mitigation measures. And the reality is there's three ways predominantly that this disease spreads. And there's fecal oral route, meaning waste. And that sounds terrible, but realize that if you're in an area with old plumbing, you know, it could be leaks in the plumbing. It could be drainage issues, a million issues. It's just human waste can spread it to some degree. They're thinking about that. These are all things that are being researched. We know that it is respiratory droplets, so it's based on respiratory release. When you talk, the moisture from your air releases, moisture from your air breath releases dropules in the air, and those dropules can have virus in it. That dropules, there's a couple things. They're trying to figure out how long those dropules can last in the air, aeration, and some people are debating that it could last in the air for up to 3 hours, hang time. The reality, who knows? They're working on it and figuring this out, but we're going to use that as one assumption. So we know that if somebody walks through an area, it's possible that their exhalation could last dropules in the air up to 3 hours, it's still being researched. They're talking about those dropules can fall, those respiratory dropules can fall on surfaces. So those surfaces have to be disinfected. And we know that they can last, that the virus, we think the virus might be able to last on surfaces for up to 24 hours, depending on the type of surface. So we know that if we touch the surface and it has the virus, and then we touch our face, we've now moved the virus from the surface to our face where we can inhale it and then cause additional harm to ourselves. So now that we know these kinds of characteristics, it helps us to understand how we start to mitigate this. That's why they're saying wash your hands often and frequently. Your grandmother wasn't wrong. Wash your hands. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. If I was a health and safety officer still in a fire department,
Sure.
I'd be walking around, people would say, hey, I just washed them. I don't care, wash them again. But that's why you're seeing things like this stuff is out and about. But nothing beats soap and hand sanitizers. Nothing beats soap and water. 20 seconds, wash your hands thoroughly. In between, get it really, really good so that you're mitigating this virus. Because the way this virus is built, it's susceptible to being destroyed by soap and water, simple soap and water.
Right. From what I read, I listened to there was a doctor out from the LA area who did through friends. I got a copy of his video, a great about 40-minute video of explanation. And one of these things he said is one of the reasons why we're washing for that 20 seconds is because that soap in there is what helps break down the fat wall around the virus. And
yeah, I'd read that.
Yeah, once that wall is broken, is breached, well, just like in any fortress or anything, once the main wall is breached, the enemy comes in and attacks. Once we wash our hands for that 20 seconds, and as Anthony just said, moving your fingers all around and going in between and going, well, almost like when you see a doctor on TV scrubbing in for surgery, you just don't need the brush, but it's to build up as much lather as you can, because the more lather of that soap, the better efficacy that detergent's going to have in getting through the walls of the virus and removing it from your hands.
So public health has said, all right, how do we mitigate and at least start to control this while we're going ahead? So there's a couple things. First is we want to make sure that we start to work on a treatment plan for people that get infected. They're working on that. We have to do a testing strategy so that we can determine the scope and magnitude of this virus and how it's spreading. We're working on that. Now, the next part of this is, in the midst of all this, we have to do mitigation measures. How do we reduce the risk and vulnerability to the community? And there's a couple things we've said. Number one, obviously the new order, wear masks when you're out and about. The reason for wearing the mask is not for you not to inhale it from other people. The reason for you to wear the mask is because one of the things I said is it's sprayed by dropules or aerated by your breath if you're infected. So we want to have a mask on because the mask stops that 3 to 6 foot spread potential and keeps it here. And then you wash the mask.
Plus the fact that we've also found in certain cases that people can be contaminated but asymptomatic and not know it, but they can still pass on the virus through normal channels. So a good reason for wearing that mask is you may be asymptomatic. You may be infected and not know it, and that's okay. I mean, if you have no symptoms, thank God, you're not getting sick, but you could still pass it on. So it's important for those of us who that happens to wear a mask and wear our gloves to lessen the spread. As Anthony has said, how far, it's 1 to 2 or 3, and then each of those 2 or 3 could go to 2 or 3. So you can see this exponential, almost a Fibonacci extension of
it is mounting. There's no doubt about it.
Exactly.
The other thing with the mask, while we're on that subject, the other thing is that there's this constant discussion about N95 versus procedural masks or cotton masks or cloth masks, whatever, all these different things. The reality is that the mask for the public is meant to stop your ability to spread the virus. In other words, it's self-isolation on a move. There you go.
Very simple.
The second thing that we see is something called an N95 mask. This big discussion about N95 masks, the need for those. The reason that they're for practitioners and the reason why practitioners need those is because they are trying to manage not getting infected. And the infection rate amongst individuals that are treating health workers is astronomical, between 25 and 30%. I think I'm estimating, but from some of the stuff I've read, it looks like it could be that high. And if that's the case, then we want to protect. And an N95 mask is not just a mask. It's technically a respirator,
right,
which means what? We all know in public safety, if I'm wearing a respirator, it's got to be fit tested. And there has to be a respiratory plan, and there has to be all these things. That is why the N95 mask, because you have to have the right mask for the right fit to do the right mitigation and management. But this is all personal protective equipment. It all goes back to that fundamental risk assessment that we do at every scene, at every operation. What is the environment? What is the conditions? What are the concerns? And in this case, there is nothing different in anything I've said so far that is not already in universal precautions that we've been teaching public safety people for at least 2 decades of my career, but more. And it's risk avoidance. Every jurisdiction, every emergency agency should have a respiratory protection plan and strategy. This all should be in there for the responders. For the public, we have to educate the public on doing this, and that's what we're doing now. So we talked about that 6 feet line, at that 6 feet border, so that we mitigate inside that 6 feet. It's a concern. We want, as responders, we want to minimize how often we're within that 6 feet of an individual until we get a mask on them and get them treated. So when we're doing initial treatment, initial assessments and such, we want to give an individual a mask if we feel that they're sick and has potential for COVID-19. We want to avoid direct contact and exposure as much as possible, wash our hands, gloves, all the traditional universal precautions and body substance isolation requirements that we have always had.
Right.
But for the public, we told the public, look, wear a mask, stay 6 feet away from individuals. That's a measure of mitigation so that you are not you're reducing your exposure or potential for exposure. Told them to wash their hands frequently and often because we know that you can touch a surface, then touch your face. So we want people to wash their hands on a regular basis. That is some of the other mitigation that's been put into place. So these are why those measures of social distancing have been put in place. If you're not in proximity to someone that's infected, the spread is minimized. If we minimize the spread, we lower the curve. Remember that whole lowering the curve. And the reason for lowering the curve becomes so important is because if I have 1,000 people run to the hospital at one time that are aggressively symptomatic, I have a problem. I have an overload. If I get 100 every couple days for 10 days versus 1,000 in one day, I can disperse my resources, I can resupply, I can manage both logistics and operations a little more efficiently. So that's the reason that all these things are being put in place. It is the reason why the public has to comply. We're seeing a lot of people congregating. We're seeing a lot of people out and about. I think that you make your own call, but that's the reason you're being told not to be in groups of more than 10, not to be in areas where you have potential to wear a mask in public, so that we can start to isolate and separate and break the chain of the infection rate.
I was in a big name store yesterday. We try to go out only twice a week at the most, but all possible. And I was amazed. The store wasn't that busy, but of the people there that I saw, and I had to go from both sides of this store. And it's one of the huge stores that people shop at frequently around the country. And I was amazed at, I'd say that people, I wore my mask, my regular mask and my gloves. And I say there were probably maybe 10% of the people in the store were wearing PPE. The rest, it was just another shopping day for them, out and about, no mask, no gloves, no sanitizer sticking out of the back pocket, nothing. It was just standard. And also, I think one of the things we want to clarify, and I did this on the podcast with Todd a couple of weeks ago, is that you're hearing today from us and on the news, and everybody wants to vote Dr. Fauci for president. I'd probably be behind that. This he's a hell of a fighter. I give him so much credit for that, and giving us such amazing information. Doesn't sugarcoat it, but he doesn't panic us either. He lets us know. But anyway, the fact is there were two terms that we're throwing back and forth that you're hearing every day, and that's coronavirus and COVID-19. And they're not the same thing. For example, the flu is the flu. The winter flu is the winter flu. But a symptom that you can get of the winter flu, especially if you have a compromised immune system, or especially if you're a victim of COPD or emphysema, is you're susceptible to pneumonia. But pneumonia and flu is still two different things. Well, the same thing here is true with coronavirus. Coronavirus is the bug, just like the common cold. It's the same, by the way. The common cold is a coronavirus. Okay, no different. So the novel coronavirus that Anthony's been talking about today is the little bug, the little virus itself. COVID-19 is a respiratory condition that is, and by the way, the number you hear is 19. Do you think they just picked that out of the hat? No. They've been dealing with repercussions of coronaviruses in Europe and the Middle East for several years now, as Anthony talked about. We talked about SARS, we talked about MERS. So they're all coronaviruses, but the resultant disease gets its name. And one of the things that I brought up to Anthony in our pre-show talk is that, the basic coronavirus is not new. We know, like I said, even the common flu bug or the common cold bug are part of the viruses. And there have been several variations. The last one that I was able to find in research on was one that affected chickens and fowl in the Middle East and in Asia. And so the state of Israel, they're scientists, and they are brilliant people over there. If you're a first responder, if you're a paramedic or a police officer, you know about the Israeli bandage. So now it's called that because that's what everybody refers it to. But it's one of the best trauma dressings we've seen in this country in years. And so their medical team went to work and we're able to develop the genome for the coronavirus for fowl, and we're able to mitigate it that way. And when China was able to eventually dig out the genome for this novel coronavirus, Israel, there's a lot of commerce between those countries, especially in high tech and things like that. Israel was able to share it with Israel, and Israel was able to jump on it. And they are a good number of weeks ahead of us in their mitigation and testing and getting a vaccine. They're in active testing on some mitigation and certain vaccines already because they were able to do that. So there are people in this world who have faced this bug that we are dealing with now. There have been thousands of contaminations in Israel and in other parts of the Middle East. And of course, we know about China and Wuhan as it moved, as Anthony said, basically it was like a wave, a tidal wave, a tsunami coming from Western Asia, heading Eastern Asia, and then heading west into Europe. And again, the way with so many people living close together, for example, in Italy, we have so many people close together, and a lot of elderly, a lot of families that have multi-generations all in the same places, and it got passed through, and that was why we had such a terrible tragedy and toll in Italy. But here we're working on in this country, as Anthony said, and the fact is that while what we've talked about in general this morning already has been basically for everybody, underscore it and put it in italics and boldface it for first responders, because you are out there day in and day out now. You might have to stay at home when you're off duty, but when you're on call or you're at the station, you still have to do both things. You have to answer your alarms and answer those, especially those EMS calls, and you have to go home eventually when your shift ends. And you have to be sure, just like, with the Cancer Initiative, how, only in the past, 5 to 10 years, we've really been able to grow and push this initiative for the fire service. And you've become more observant and more careful of what you bring home, how to shower before, if you've been in a working fire, get those contaminants off you, those carcinogenic. You have to do the same thing here. Before you go home, you've got to take care of yourself. So you got to take care of yourself and your comrades at the station. And then when it's time to go home, you got to take care of yourself when you do that. So you're playing multiple roles.
Absolutely. I want to point out coronavirus is not the flu. And I think people need to understand this moves much more rapid. It has much more impact. And we're not quite sure. Government is not quite sure. Science is not quite sure yet why it impacts some more than others. In some states, the population of 18 to 40 is getting more infection than seniors, as people think.
Right. Louisiana. Yeah.
Right. And it's important to understand, as a responder, everyone has the potential to infect me with something. Right. That is why universal precautions are in place.
Exactly.
You're supposed to assume that there's a risk. I do want to point out that jurisdictions, governments, emergency response agencies are supposed to have a respiratory protection plan. This is when that plan is supposed to be implemented aggressively. The other part of that is I want to point out, there is under OSHA's requirements something called the General Protection Clause. Under OSHA standards, and EMS can be under OSHA, fire, if depending on how they're incorporated, can be under OSHA, but businesses as well. You have a responsibility to provide for the general protection and safety of your personnel from known threats. I'm not a lawyer. I think this threat's pretty known if it's on the news every night. So we have some responsibility to protect our workers. In my case, in our community, we are predominantly working remote. When I have somebody in the office, it's an isolated individual to handle the office general matters. We have no public coming into the office because we're in an area that has significant, not substantial, but significant potential around us of infections. So we want to make sure to protect our personnel. I think we need to do the same thing in emergency services. I'm not saying we don't go to calls, but when you go to that call, mitigate your exposure and risk time within 6 feet of that individual. Manage the individual in reverse isolation, so that you can manage the threat to yourself, to your squad, decontaminate, work on your squad, clean things as you normally would, so that we're mitigating the potential of cross-contamination or exposure. Flu is not a common cold. I've already talked about the differences. I've already talked about the two main issues from a public health perspective, and that's the number of individuals a person can spread the disease to and the rate at which that disease spreads. And we need to keep in mind that threat assessment as we do our job. Lastly, most important is the number of individuals that get this infection are asymptomatic, as you pointed out. We have to remember there's a good number of people, forget the numbers, the percentages. There is a good number of people that you're going to come in contact with that may be contaminated and simply not know. And that's what we have to do to protect ourselves. Gloves, mask, if you want to wear gowns, whatever your departmental protocol is, and whatever PPE is available. It is that important. We've not paid attention to a lot of this stuff for years in a way maybe we should have as far as personal protection, because in emergency services, we tend to get it done. But now's the time that we have to absolutely follow those rules aggressively, because now we're not just talking about infecting ourselves. And the last number I had heard in one state was up to 15% of responders are potentially going to become infected if they're not already. That's a high number.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. That's 15 out of 100 people in your department, 1.5 out of 10. So 2 people out of 10 in your department, are you ready to lose them? And I've been doing pandemic planning since, I'm too old to say when, but the fact of the matter is, we've always warned in 2006 with avian flu. We said, look, you might lose 40% of your workforce. Plan accordingly. Well, now it's here. The difference is, the one game changer from way back when, I know I'm old, is that we didn't have the communications technology, the ability to work so remotely as we have today.
Very true.
So take advantage of it. That's the reality of that.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break here, folks. And when we come back, we'll be talking with Anthony some more about coronavirus, COVID-19, facts versus fables, reality, and is there light waiting for us at the end of the tunnel? So we'll be right back right after these words. Please stay tuned. And we're back with this episode of 5 Alarm Task Force and my very welcome guest, Anthony Mangeri, who is a certified, oh my God, there's so many certifications here, but most important.
I'm just Anthony.
Huh?
Just Anthony.
Just Anthony. But he's a state hazard mitigation officer. He was the operations chief in New Jersey Op Center after 911. He's been a volunteer EMT for more than 30 years. He's got all the certifications and the knowledge. And he has, because of his work, he has done this preparation. He knows what it's all about. If you listen to this first segment, he explained why he knew what was going to be needed based on his own experience having to deal with the public safety and making sure that their emergency supplies we have to, when we talk about first responders, we have to start with dispatches. They are our very first responder. Without them, and there are some communities that they are losing them, a large percentage of them.
Since you brought it up, I want to point something out.
Sure.
Many first responders are also many dispatchers are also active first responders in their communities. Their career job is dispatching, but many of them come from the public safety world as their avocation.
Right.
So as we're losing a percentage of people as responders because they're getting infected and they have to quarantine and isolate themselves, the same thing, we're losing them in 2 places, actually.
Exactly. So, it's made it all the more difficult for us to work through, because when the people we put on the front lines to answer those calls, and all of a sudden, if we normally have 5 rigs running, and all of a sudden now we only have manpower for 3 rigs, well, those 4 other people, or maybe if it was 6, it was 3 on a rig, that makes a big dent in our ability to provide emergency services to our communities. And we have to, and so if you're, for example, if you're not in, but you're a buff of the emergency services, and we welcome you. You know, you're always welcome here at Five Alarm Task Force. If you're a buff, it's going to be important that you take some of this information you're getting today, and especially if your goal is not only am I a buff, but I want to be a volunteer, I want to be a career firefighter, I want to be a paramedic, whatever, I want to be a law enforcement officer. But you need to take some of the lessons that you're learning today from Anthony, and hopefully you'll go to our webinar next week on the 17th, and you can take the information and use that in your life now to help you avoid being either catching the bug as a receiver, or if God forbid you're already contaminated but you're asymptomatic, how to take care of yourself so that hopefully you'll stay that way and you won't pass it on to anybody else in your household if you share it with other people. So it's important not just for our first responders, but it's for anybody who's listening to this podcast, that all the information that Anthony is sharing with us today applies to all of us. I mean, I've been washing my hands singing the ABCs for the last 3 weeks now, and my wife gets a kick out of it. Well, I sing it very slow. I've used my timer. I sing it the whole way. And I mean, I do the old kiddie sing song, A B C D, and I do it. Then I even do the big finish with, now I've said my ABC, aren't you very? But you know what? I get to 26, 27 seconds with my hands all foamed up by just singing that song. Yeah, I feel silly in front of the mirror in the restroom or in the kitchen. But you know what? If that disallows me from sharing the bug, if I had it on me from my wife, I'll wash for 2 minutes if I have to protect her.
As first responders, we can't preach day in and day out safety first and family first, and then not do it during this time.
Exactly.
I understand the desire and passion to be there for your community. We've all signed on to community above self. I get it. But my family takes priority in my protection, and it has to be.
Has to be.
We've also taught, don't go if you can't protect yourself. You're the most important person.
Right.
So remember those things. Those rules still apply. If you can't adequately protect yourself and you don't understand what's going on, your first responsibility is to you as a responder.
Right. Because if you can't respond, you can't help anybody else.
That's exactly right.
That's what it boils down to. And that's why we do what we do, because we have one goal in mind. Well, we might like to hear the siren and the red lights. Okay. But we want to help people. It's like our late, great mentor, Chief Bruno, told us our job is to go out and help Mrs. Smith on her worst day, even if that worst day is her cat up a tree.
Absolutely.
We go, we get the kitty down, we give it to her, and she's pleased as punch, and we go on to our next job, helping somebody else on their worst day. But we have to be able to do it. We have to be physically able and healthy enough to do it. And everything we've talked about before this pandemic on this show, everything about firefighter health, wellness, fitness for duty, the cancer initiatives, behavioral health initiatives, those are still imperatives in our lives. They have to remain so. Right now, they're just a little bit overshadowed by the pandemic that we have to deal with. But all of these roll together into one thing. You have to do this job, whichever level of emergency responder you are, to do this job, you have to be fit and healthy enough to do it. And you don't want to make sure you want to make sure you don't give it to anybody else.
Absolutely.
So that's what that's going to. All right. So with a lot of this now, and again, neither you or I are doctors. We both have our emergency medical backgrounds from our service in our communities. But we know that from papers, radio, television, 24-hour news going nonstop, and clips and editing and Photoshop, we've all been accosted by all sorts of information on television. The other day, I got an ad in an app on my phone for crossword puzzles. And I finished a puzzle and an app came up. It says, oh, we have 60% alcohol hand sanitizer, a 500 milliliter bottle on sale for $21.99. So, and then
Yeah.
what was they had something? Oh, they had gloves, a hundred box of 100, not even nitrile gloves, 100 gloves for $14.99, box of 100. So I wrote them a letter, and I wrote them an email. I got their website, and I traced it to the who is, and I wrote them an email. I said, thank you for providing me with all the information that I can pass on to the Federal Trade Commission as you're gouging publicly on the market for these goods. And I just left it at that. And I got an email back from them yesterday, and it said, we're sorry for any inconvenience the ad created. We are looking to see what we can do to remedy the situation. Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of profiteering, and there's a lot of people who are going to use this as an opportunity to make money, not as an opportunity to provide you the resource.
Right. Well, as I said off camera, down here in Florida, after Irma was, I've been here since Andrew. We went through Andrew back in '92, and we had Irma 2017, and after Wilma in 2005, the state passed an anti-gouging law, and gasoline prices cannot be raised above basic necessities: water, ice, food prices. And so down here, though, you still have people at the drop of a hat. If there's some sort of threat, they are out there gouging. They're buying in hordes. Now, I can't imagine. Let me ask you this question. I'm going to, Anthony, we talk about this crowd buying, purchasing. Now, they started purchasing before they really know the effects of the coronavirus, the symptoms. But I guess everybody expected that one of the biggest symptoms of it was going to be diarrhea, because they went out and bought, 50 cases of toilet paper the first day after it was announced that we were going into lockdown, as though, the worst symptom of this virus was going to be diarrhea, as opposed to distancing and the cold symptoms, cough symptoms, pneumonia symptoms. Why would people have gone crazy like that for a simple commodity such as toilet paper, would you think? Oh, hold on. Your audio is muted.
Sorry about that.
There you go. Okay, we're back.
I think that we need to focus on we need to focus on being informed properly. More than ever, we need to make sure that we have proper information and we're getting it from an authoritative source. Popular media is not an authoritative source. Political theater, I'll leave it at that, is not an authoritative source. In the United States, the Centers for Disease Control and the state public health authorities are the authoritative source. These are people that have studied and researched. They are focused on public health, safety, and welfare, and that's the authoritative source. Now, will their views change over time? Yes, because this is an emerging threat. But they're the ones with the most accurate information. They're the ones that are doing the intelligence with other countries and other information to find out what's coming and going. But like any good intelligence system, bad data in, bad data out. So trying right now to figure out what data from other countries, what data is legitimate versus not. For example, the death toll in the United States is a hard number. But the death toll is predicated upon those people that were tested and confirmed positive who passed away, or presumed to have COVID and passed away in the hospital or in other areas. So observed, for example, versus unobserved. The problem is that number is probably much lower than the reality, because we can't take into account those individuals who were not tested or confirmed to have COVID or presumed to have COVID before they passed. They might have had flu, because flu is still killing people.
Right, sure.
Other diseases are still killing people, respiratory diseases. So this is all still going on in the background of this COVID, and we have to make sure the numbers, because again, we want to properly identify what is the threat and what is its impact. Threat and vulnerability analysis, same thing emergency managers do day in and day out.
Sure.
Excuse me, I have a cold. I don't have anything else,
Okay, good.
but no fever. And that brings up a question I want to make sure that people are aware of. Part of being informed is being informed about yourself. Every day, I'm silly. I know I'm isolated in my home. I'm quarantined. But if I'm asking my staff to do it, I do it as well. Every day I take my temperature. Every day I kind of do a self-assessment of where I'm at. How am I feeling? If I feel sick, then I'm going to let people know. Right now I'm fine. I have a cold and I have a cough rather because it's also, by the way, spring. Everything decided to bloom. So I've got allergies like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
So I know that because I have no fever. I have a stuffy nose, but no running nose. I needed to know the symptoms of COVID so that I then can do a self-assessment of my fitness for duty or readiness to take on the day. And we all need to do that as responders. So if you feel sick, stay home. And they call this the 30 days of slowing the spread. If you feel sick, stay home. If your children are sick, stay home. If someone in your household is tested positive, stay home. If you're an older person and you have issues or concerns, you know what? Maybe this one's not your fight. Stand back and let those that are more fit for duty because of their health overall. And you mentioned earlier about being fit. Well, stand back from this one if you can. If you're needed, you make those choices. But if you've got comorbid conditions, if you're a diabetic, have high blood pressure, have respiratory illness on any given day, maybe this isn't the one for you right now. But that doesn't mean you can't do other things. You know, not everybody's on the front.
Right.
I'm just as happy pumping the engine as I would be going in a building anymore at my age, but I don't do either anymore, but I miss it.
Don't we all?
But if you're a person with serious underlying health conditions, let your leadership know and assign yourself accordingly. It's just doing the right things with the right tools.
That's a great point.
The other thing is, I like CDC as a good authoritative source. If you're looking for, and one of the things I've done in my jurisdiction, for example, is I'm posting to my community like every other person, except that I am not repeating guidance that is out there already. Because if I repeat it and it's on the internet, it's going to stay there forever. So what I do is I tell people the guidance for you for this issue is available here. And I give them the links. This way, if CDC changes their guidance, when the person links to it, they'll get the most current guidance. So I don't repeat guidance that's available. And National Volunteer Fire, that you pointed out earlier, National Volunteer Fire Council has a very good website that has taken the time to kind of put all these things together, including some actionable items that they're working on, but also links so that you can go out and find the information you want. And that is their COVID-19 information and resources for emergency responder site. I looked it over. It's a good site. It gives you good guidance. And that's a place. But they're, for example, they're not going to tell you, well, the CDC says, just like I won't. I say the information about this issue is at CDC and this website. And that's important. That's a distinction that's very important so that when you go there, you're getting the most up-to-date site and information. CDC has a decent site, a good site, cdc.gov/coronavirus. And that will bring you into CDC's information. Simple things like, what are the symptoms? Fever, cough, shortness of breath. What is the onset? How do you do a self-assessment? What's a face cover? What do we mean by a cloth cover? How often should you wash things? That's all there so that you can find it for yourself versus somebody else telling you, and then the information changes and you don't have the most current data. So they're the places I go. I also go to state public health, and the reason is because while CDC will tell you national and international trends, your local government and your state or local government, if you have a local public health or county public health, obviously they're going to tell you the trends in your area, and you need to be aware of both.
Right.
National trends will tell you what might be coming at you or where you're at in the system in the bigger picture, and local will tell you the directives and guidance locally. For example, Delaware, the CDC has guidance for EMS response. Excuse me, but Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania may have specific orders for EMS response in your jurisdiction. So you have to look at both places, especially if you're an agency like fire, EMS, public safety, police, so that you find out not just what's happening as guidance, what are the orders and directives of my jurisdiction, what the authority that has oversight over me, what are they telling me to do? And
Sure.
they know, they have more of a better picture of what's going on in my community. Excuse me, I touched my face, I know. This crisis has confirmed that really in a crisis, people deplore a void. Don't not share information. We've learned very aggressively that people don't share information. What winds up happening is they go get it somewhere. And if they go get it somewhere, it's not going to necessarily be the most accurate, the most reliable. It's probably going to be somebody who shares thoughts and minds, because in this day and age, we get a huge amount, an overwhelming majority of the news that we receive is via social media or internet or via the web. 70-something% via the phone. So push down. So we're not always going to get information in that broader scope unless we go look for it, because some of the information that we get is from opinions of people rather than fact. And that's what we have to be careful about. Everybody has an opinion. I have a personal opinion about a lot of things, but I also teach as an academic. It's wrong for me to give my personal view. It's what can I research and find as factual. We now have to be that researcher individually to make sure that we know what it is we're talking about, and what it is the authorities, the scientists, and of course the last person, maybe the first person for some of you is your own medical physician, your own medical people. I know that the health centers that I generally go to, the doctors I go to, they've been putting out information to me fairly regularly and telling us what they want to do, guidance. If you're questioning, if you're sick, if you're questioning any of that, your doctor's where you should be. Your healthcare provider, not just your doctor, I'm sorry, but your healthcare provider is where you should be. So I don't want those things to get lost in the shuffle either.
Right. That's very important. And I think, last week, somebody brought up a point where, well, all of a sudden we had this big spike in positive across the country. Why well, it wasn't that so many more people got ill, is that we finally got the testing out. We were way behind in the testing, unfortunately, but that's done, and we're getting tests done. So those of us, I'm sure Anthony was prepared for higher numbers, as most of the people in the business are, that once testing started on a grander scale, we knew that there were going to be two results. You either were going to be positive or you're going to be negative. And so the numbers of actual cases grew in the public news only because we had more test results. So it didn't mean necessarily that things were worse. It was just that we had a better accounting of the number of people who were sick, which then allows, like the CDC, to do their modeling with their supercomputers and get a better idea of the handling of how to handle it, that they can then pass on to the states and then the localities, as Anthony was just talking about. You can't just jump out of your skin and saying, well, I think I'm going to go with what Montana says because they seem to have a lot better than my state. Well, yeah, maybe at this moment they did. Louisiana was doing great until just after Mardi Gras too. We're concerned down here in Florida. We're waiting to see the pushback from all these kids who were down here those first 2 weeks of March, last week of February, who did not deal with, even though it was posted on the beaches, the 6 foot distancing, They didn't. And but these poor kids, they were interviewed. Say, well, why are you here? Well, we already paid the money, so we thought we might as well have fun while we're here. And the reporter said,
I
go
I
ahead.
even had students that were there,
Okay.
and one of the students that was there sent me an email and said, "Professor, they're shutting down flights. Or I'm concerned I can't get on flights. Hey, listen, how do I get home?" And I'm like, "Excuse me, you're there already, and you're asking me how to get home?" And yeah, I think that it's an old expression: you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think when you're young, you don't know what you don't know. Um, but those thousands of people that congregated, not just in Florida, but
Yeah.
in Louisiana
Well,
and other places,
yeah.
they all went back to their communities. They all took planes, trains, and automobiles, went back to where they came from. And they didn't go to college, because colleges generally extended um,
Spring break.
spring break and then told students, no, we're done for the semester. We're going to go virtual, many schools. And okay, well, so online became the standard. So all these students then went home. So they went and dispersed themselves back throughout the country. And that, I'm sure, is why some people were concerned that this week, or many are stating this week's going to be more severe than most. It's also because of the spread rate and timing. But that rate, all these people went back and brought it with them. And many of them asymptomatic. I think testing is a big, big issue. But even more importantly is the presumption that everybody's contaminated and infected when you're a responder, and you have to treat people accordingly. You are a potential threat to me, whether it's flu, whether it's SARS or COVID, regardless, you have a potential pathogen that might harm me. So I'm going to treat everyone with that distancing, with the universal precautions, reverse isolation. That's the safest at this point because we're not testing everybody. We can't test
Right.
billions of people at a moment's notice.
Yeah. I mean, I said to my wife, I said, look, we don't need to be tested. We don't have underlying medical issues. Thank goodness. We're old. Okay. We're old. So we're over 65. Well over 65. But I said, as long as we're okay, then we do what we keep on doing. We wash our hands, we wear our masks and our gloves, we clean up, we have the Purell. We're just taking care of ourselves the way we should, and we avoid going out for the most part, maybe at once to twice in maybe 7 to 10 days. And is it a change in our lifestyle? Sure. My wife was a teacher, so she's been teaching for one of her jobs. She's been teaching online. They went on vacation as of yesterday because of the Passover holiday, so they'll be off this week and then into next. But the fact is that she never taught online before. She had been in the classroom. That's what. Yes, she had a computer, but she had to grow into and adapt into this teaching role that she would be continue to be paid for, which was really great of this school. They're going to continue to pay those teachers for teaching online. So she did. She adapted. She learned how to do it, and that's what she's been doing to take care of it. And I think that each of us, if we have the wherewithal to be first responders, to dedicate ourselves to help others, then we have the ability to take care of ourselves and those around us. We just have to set that as our first priority, to take care of ourselves. Even as Anthony said, he and his staff, he set up a regimen. They have to take their temperatures every day. They do a self-assessment. Okay, so he has the nasal thing and the allergies. Our younger daughter, who just moved down to Florida, is tremendously allergic to the pollen and down here and the trees down here. But everyone is doing their best to take care of themselves first. Because if you don't take care of yourself first, you can't turn around and help somebody else.
Absolutely. I should point out, even though I know this is sinuses and all, I'm still isolated. I'm still
Yeah,
in my house. We're working remotely. It's just knowing your limits and doing the right thing
exactly.
so that the mission can get done by, if you're a responder and if you're a citizen, it's doing the right thing to stem the spread. We
Right.
have to reduce the spread. Um,
And as a first responder, you've done training. You've done classroom training, you've done live training. You're used to the rigors of learning to do something new, whether it's popping a door, making a intelligent, aggressive attack, whichever it's going to be. You learn it, you apply yourself to that. And you learn from people that you know are good teachers. You go to the conferences, regional, national, local. You go to hear these people speak because you've heard of them, you've read their articles in the trades, and you trust them with the information they deliver. Well, as a first responder, if you're looking to have a knowledge beyond your community, your state, listen to the people that, the same kind of people that you would for learning how to do a new tactic for fire or EMS or law enforcement. Listen to the same people you would trust for that information to give you the information about what's going on in our communities today. Those are the good people who will give you the right information that you can take back or refer back to. As Anthony just said, you can say, hey, listen, I just saw this on the CDC website. Go to cdc.gov/COVID-19, and you'll get this. This information will be a big help to us on our calls. Just look what it says there about first responders. That's the way you do it. Okay.
And pull off that respiratory plan that you have, the respiratory infection control plan in your jurisdiction, and dust it off and see what it says. You may find out you have a vendors list in there you forgot about.
Yeah, that's a great point. You may not have to depend on just the big groups. It could be somebody very local in your county who you didn't even realize made some form of PPE that you could use, and their number is right there. So Anthony's given us some great information today, and what I'm hoping is that you're going to take it to heart. Yeah, we like to have fun on 5 Alarm Task Force and have some joking around, but right now we're not in a joking situation. This is serious. As the old saying goes, this is as serious as a heart attack. But right now, we're looking at more things than heart attacks that are so serious. So I hope that you'll, maybe give this a second listen. Run the podcast by again or watch the video again and listen to what Anthony shares with us today, and take it to heart. And you know what? Yeah, give somebody else the link to, they can find us on YouTube at the Dalmatian Productions channel, or on our podcast platforms. We're on all the major podcast platforms. We'll have this audio out there probably sometime over the weekend or Monday at the latest. And you'll have a good resource because Anthony is my guest today. And he's been a great resource for us today of how to look at this as first responders and as members of the community. Remember, we were always members first of the community before we ever became a first responder.
Very true. I don't have a crystal ball on how this is going to go and resolve. I do want to point something out, though. I do know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, very simply, because that's what we do in government and public safety, is we find that light at the end of the tunnel. We insist on it, as a matter of fact, that light at the end of the tunnel. So at the end of the day, we'll make this work. And it's what we do. So I appreciate your time today, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone.
Well, it's my pleasure to have you back, and I'm glad we connected once again thanks to LinkedIn, and we had a kind of an idea of a topic, but as a couple of weeks went by, man, we zeroed in on this, and I think it came out very well. And so my sincere thanks to my guest, Anthony Mangeri, for sharing his wisdom and his experience with us today. And we'll be back with you very soon with another podcast. And again, please don't forget, especially if you're a first responder of any level, next Friday, the 17th of April at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, we're having a special webinar. We have tickets are just $10, and up to the first 100 registrants. And all the net proceeds of this webinar is going to be donated to the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation and to the First Responder Second Center of Excellence, especially to hopefully get some PPE. And our guest that day, our speakers will be Todd LeDuc, the Chief Strategy Officer for LifeScan Wellness, who is very generously sponsoring the webinar with us. And again, my partner in sponsoring it is Insight Training, my good friend Andy Starnes, along with us, Five Alarm Task Force. Also speaking will be Dan Kerrigan, who is the co-author of Firefighter Functional Fitness and a great fitness and firefighter health expert in our country, and a real wealth of knowledge for us. And Dr. Denise Smith, professor at Skidmore College. She's the director of First Responder Health and Safety Laboratory there. So they'll all have great information for us. Tickets are available. Just go to our website, the easiest way. Go to our website, dalmatianproductions.tv, and smack dab at the top of the homepage, you'll see the post for it, and there's a link right there, one word, click here, H-E-R-E, it's underlined, click there, and it'll take you to the link to purchase the tickets. If you have any questions, you can't find the link for whatever reasons, please drop me a line to dalmatprod@outlook.com. That's dalmatprod, DALMATPROD @outlook.com. Stay safe, stay well, stay home, and we'll hope to see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.